This is going to be a tutorial on how to import your assets from Unreal, from Maya into Unreal. So let's say this is the rock you have. First you need to make sure it's the right scale. So we're going to go to Display, Grid, set this to 200, grid line every 5 units, 1 subdivision, and make sure it says display numbers on axes. This will now show you its size in centimeters. As you can see, this rock is super tiny. So I'm going to increase its size up to about 30 radius, which will mean it is 600 centimeters across. Still a fairly small rock. You can bump it up to 500 and it'll be about half the size of Unreal Man. Sorry, 50, and it'll be half the size of Unreal Man. Once you have it the right size, you're going to select your rock, File, Export Selection. You want to make sure you have smoothing groups on and all the other things turned off. Make sure animation is not on. And then you're going to go to the folder where you have it saved, preferably on the Maya folder that's hooked up to source control that we have for the level design team. You can go in here. We have an exports folder. You're going to make a folder called SM Rock. And this is SM Rock 01. So SM for static mesh. Export. Okay, cool. Now we go into Unreal. We go to that folder where we exported the FBX. We import it. Oh yeah, not yet. We make a folder, call it SM Rock 01. Make a folder. Drag this in. When you import it, you'll get this as a heads-up display. You can set your settings to what I have below, but the most important ones are to make sure normal import method is import normals, make sure it's not compute normals, make sure it's import normals. Auto generate collision, that's fine. And then click do not create material and local, and then just import. What will happen now is you have your static mesh. Now we can go grab our textures. So you can go to level design. This is where my textures are located. You can grab these, drag them in. Unreal will import them. And then for the roughness, occlusion roughness metallic map, double click on it and turn off sRGB. This is very important, otherwise your masks will not work accurately. Next, you're gonna go to this folder. We're gonna go to materials, and you'll notice we have a basic opaque substance material. You're gonna right click on it, create material instance. I'm gonna call this MI Rock 01. MI for material instance. And move it in here. Once that's there, you're going to double click on it. If you would like to see the material using your rock, you can select your rock in your content browser and then click this button here, and it'll import your rock as the model for preview. And when you open it up, you'll notice you'll have the following options. It'll let you change out the textures that we're using. So for the base color, here's just the normal and the roughness metallic, occlusion roughness metallic. Make sure material 01 is metallic. If your M channel has metallic in it, make sure this is on. If it has a height instead, so if we are using displacement, which is a height map instead of a metallic map, then this should be turned off. So on if M, off if H. An example of something using a height map is our dirt, which uses a height map to make it look bumpier. So this is metallic for now because it does have a roughness metallic map. And once you do that, your cost for this shader will display up here, 124 instructions. You will then have control over several things about the material. For now, you can control the tint of the color a little bit if you'd like. Right, you can make it a little blue. You just have to make sure you turn the checkbox on. You can control its specular. This is 1 specular, 0 specular, 0.5. 0 specular looks very toony. And then your roughness, min and max. So what this does is that we are using the roughness map as a mask. And essentially, this will let you say what's the lowest your roughness can go and what's the highest it can get. So if we make this 0, 0, it will not work because we have a roughness map already. But the idea is you are able to control the minimum and maximum roughness. If you want to control the height of your height map, you can tweak it with this. If you want to, instead of using an ORH map, if you want to use a separate texture for the height, you can turn this on, and then you'll notice it gives you an option to swap out the texture for the height. So this will be your height material used for this placement. I'm going to turn that off for now because this doesn't use it. If your texture has an emissive channel, you can turn this on, and then it'll give you an option to give it an emissive texture. And you'll also be able to tweak it, as you'll see here. If this is checkerboarded, it means your shaders are compiling. And usually you can tell that from the shaders compiling up here or the shaders compiling down here. Once that's done, I can show you an example of using an emissive. If you don't see anything, it's because the intensity is turned to 0 by default. You want to turn the intensity on. And now you'll notice if I made this for my sphere, but if I use this instead, you can increase the intensity of the brightness of the emissive. If you want to turn it off, you can set it to 0. And you can change its color if you need to. Set this to 0. If you turn the checkboxes off, it will reset to the default values. If you want to use tessellation, you'll have to turn this on, and this will give you a set of other controls for the tessellation. Tessellation is basically height. It makes the surface bumpier. It creates fake geometry, essentially. If you would like to scale the UVs of your textures, for example, if you have a repeating texture, like a water texture, you can scale it here, and this will make the textures repeat more. But this typically does not work well with assets that are not planned to have this. But it might be a quick way to get some rough variation if you wanted to, but I wouldn't suggest it. If you would like to have a second level of textures on your model, you can turn on the layer textures, and now you'll have a second material that will allow you to essentially give it different textures. If I were to import my rock into my level, for now I'll turn off the navigation. You don't have to do this, but if you don't do this, it'll stutter the painting process for some reason. So it's compiled here, but not over here. Because it does not have its texture. To give it the texture, you can either drag it on in the game, or if you open up the asset and set its default texture up here to this, now when I drag it into the level, it will have the texture on by default. Okay? So, I turned on layer textures. If that is turned on, that means you're able to go into your level where the rock is, go to modes, mesh paint, go to colors, select your rock, click paint, and you're able to change the size of your brush, its intensity here. Currently, I have it set up so if you paint, you have to paint the red channel to swap between the two textures. So now that I'm painting only in the red channel, I'm painting white and black, so it's like a mask. When I paint white, it becomes the grass. If I paint black, it becomes the original texture, the rock. And what you are essentially painting here are the vertices, not the surface. So you need to paint where the vertices are if you want to see any sort of effect. Like this. And you see how it says building navigation? If you turn this, if you type in here and turn that off, it will stop bothering you whenever you paint. And now I'm slowly painting in the original texture. You can control the fall off here if you need to. Let's put this in the sun. Paint. If it's not painting, you might have to increase the strength. And you want to make sure you get those vertices, because that's what you're painting. You're painting vertices, you're not painting the surface. There you go. The lower poly an asset, the harder it will be to paint, essentially. And this is how you would be able to mix textures together in Engine. Yeah. So if you, let's say that was done, I have an additional feature in this material. If you go to snow layers and you turn that on, you will now, once the shaders are done compiling, have a layer of snow above your rock. And you'll also notice it gives us a new set of, so if I collapse material 1, material 2, we now have the options for snow. Once this is done compiling, it will stop being checkerboarded. Almost. Okay. Now, this is blending a little awkwardly, but notice how it adapts to the direction of the rock. The snow applies better with more geometry on the model. So if it doesn't work, it might mean your rock is too low poly. But it's not, there's not a lost cause, because you are able to go back in, go to mesh paint, and swap from red to green. And using this, you are able to edit the snow that gets applied. So remember to paint on the vertices. That's why the brush has those green dots when you're painting. On top of that, before you start painting, what I recommend is going back to mode, to selection mode with Shift 1, and then tweaking the snow blend bias, contrast, and sharpness values to get a look that you want. The bias controls how far up from the top to the bottom. Let me show you an example here. The bias controls how far up from the top to the bottom the snow will apply. So if it's set to 0, and now if it's set to 1, you see? So another technique is, wait, nav. Another technique is to go to, first start off by setting up the snow at the blend bias you like. And go to modes, mesh paint, paint. And now you can paint on the green channel. Increase that size, maybe the strength. And you can edit the snow after you said, okay, this is the highest it can be from the top of the model, and this is the lowest it can be. Or you can add snow where there shouldn't be. But that doesn't work as well. So I recommend first planning out how far down the snow can get, because you can only remove and add to areas that the bias affects. So you can always paint the underside if you want to. You'll just have to make the bias cover the underside. You can also tweak the contrast, and it will harshen the appearance of the blend. So it won't be a soft snow. It will be harder. And the sharpness does something similar. So you can play with the sharpness and contrast if you want to make it look more stylized rather than soft. If you want to change the direction where the snow is coming from, you can do this. So right now B is Z. RGB is the same thing as XYZ. So this is projecting the snow from above. If I did -1, it would project it from below, as you can see. If I set this to 0 and I set this to 1, it now projects from the X. So notice the X is where the snow will start piling up from. And you can tweak this to sort of fix, if you want it to sort of get a direction that you want the snow to appear from. So you're not just stuck to snow coming from above. You can have it come from below, any sort of angle. And this is how you can achieve that. On top of that, you can control the color of the snow. So you can make it yellow snow if you want to avoid that. You can make the snow metallic, rough, specular. You can set this to like 0 or 1. It's up to you. And there is an option to use normal for snow vector. This essentially will make it'll change how the snow gets blended, whether it's using vertices or if it's using a normal map. So this will, I believe, use the normal map, not just the vertices of the model, once this is done compiling. Yes, so now you'll notice if I go to this here, actually this is the opposite. This is blending using the vertex normals. So that's why you have this harsh geometry here. It might give you a look you desire though, so just play around with it. And if you want more complicated snow, if you don't want just pure white, you can turn on complex snow material, and this will give you a third material layer that you can layer on top. Be careful when layering, when turning on the second layers and first layers. Only use those if you need them, because they do add more instruction counts, which cost performance overall. So only use them if they're necessary for the scene. Don't just use them willy-nilly, especially the snow. So now that I turned on the complex snow material, it gives me options for swapping out the normals. And it also lets me swap out the ORM for the grass, for the snow, and the base color up here. But for the most part, I think the white one works fine. Those are essentially all the options available in the default substance material you'll be using. I'll be making a separate video for the landscape. And that is how you import a material, import your geometry into the engine. You can probably just watch the beginning of this video if you just want to import a basic asset with only the base textures and don't want to use any of the features. But yeah, this material has a bunch of features. Later down the road, if this is proving to be too costly, which seems fine right now, I will make a simplified version of the shader that will take away these extra sliders and will basically make it to be much fewer sliders and just the textures in the future. But for now, that's it. And this is typically how most basic material looks. These are the settings. Just material 01, tessellation, UVs, and then some switches at the bottom. Yep, that's pretty much it.